Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Elizabeth Medallia. I'm the chair of the Standing Committee on the Law Library of Congress, and we're delighted to see you. This program has been done since not 2011, although it changes every time because, among other things, the technology changes. And over 6,000 people have seen this program, and it's available on the Standing Committee's website. Afterwards, we keep updating what we put there. So if you need to see it again, you will be able to. I must put in a plug for the traveling exhibit on the celebration of Magna Carta. There are materials in the back, and that's the Standing Committee's big project right now to work on the celebration of the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta. But this morning we're going to look about free legal research online, and we're very fortunate to have with us to make the presentation Matthew Braun, a senior legal research specialist at the Law Library of Congress. Matt has been doing this program since 2011. I've seen it almost every time, and I learn something new every time, plus I don't remember everything, so it's good to see it multiple times. He has a BA from Miami University of Ohio, a Master of Library Science from the University of North Carolina, and a JD from Ohio State. So he's a Midwest person and is a member of the Ohio Bar, and I won't take any more of his time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you so much for coming this morning. It's a little cold out, yet it is sunny, and so thank you, and it's wonderful to be here in Chicago for the 2014 mid-year meeting. Before I start, I'd like to just go over a couple logistics. In the back of the room, the materials for the session are available. The slides that I will be using today, they're in color, so you can see everything fairly clearly. There's also a gold evaluation form. And if you wouldn't mind just filling this out sometime during the session or at the end of the session, just leaving it on the back table, that helps me know what to change for the next time I do this, things that you'd like, things that you would like to see included perhaps in future presentations along these lines. If you're coming in and you need CLE credit and you haven't checked with the table just outside the room, you'll want to go ahead and do that. Amy Horton-Newell, who's the director of the ABA Standing Committee on the Law Library of Congress, is out there and she will assist you with that. So without any further delay, I will go ahead and start with the slides. This is the easiest way to do this, is to go with PowerPoint, although it'd be great if we could do something really interactive. But of course, if you're on your computers, if you're on your mobile devices and you're connected to 3 or 4G or even to the hotel's wireless, please follow along if you'd like. Just to give you an idea here, that is the top of the Thomas Jefferson building of the Library of Congress. We have a 3-building campus in Washington, D.C., and that is what you see in the slides right there. And then my contact information, as you can see, is on the first slide. You will also see it on the last slide. And I also have business cards. They're not for me specifically. They have the phone number for the reference desk in the Law Library of Congress, which is open 8:30 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Saturday. So please give us a call, let us know how we can help you as we go forward. So a little bit of background on the Law Library of Congress. The Law Library was established in 1832 as a separate department of the Library of Congress by law. It is the largest law library in the world. It's one of 19 publicly accessible reading rooms in the Library of Congress's 3-building campus in Washington. We have roughly 2.84 million volumes, all kinds of things. Most of this material is in the sub-basement of the James Madison building where the Law Library's reading room is located. These materials cover roughly 267 different countries. And we have a reading room of approximately 30,000 volumes. However, we're going to be making some changes to that reading room later in 2014. We're going to be renovating it. We did get the approval. We've been working on the preparations for this for about 4 years now. Now, before I get into what we have on our website and how we service attorneys both in and outside of Washington, D.C., I want to make a mention of a part of the law library that is very important, and that is our Global Legal Research Center. And this is a center that is staffed by foreign trained attorneys who will give members of the public, constituents, as we would call members of the public, because you have to think in congressional terms so often. They will give both reference assistance and some suggestions to find materials for those foreign jurisdictions. So again, if you're doing research on foreign, international, and comparative law, please do give us a call at the reference desk. That number right there is the 202-707-5080 number. It's also the number that's on the business cards at the back of the room. And I will also show you the Library of Congress's Ask a Librarian service. That is very helpful. You can send us a question by email. So the Global Legal Research Center covers these core jurisdictions here, but there are many others that are covered both as a primary jurisdiction and as a secondary jurisdiction. So that's just an example of some of the countries that we do cover in detail. The Law Library's homepage is www.law.gov. If you type that URL into a browser, it'll redirect to a slightly different address, but that's the one to remember. It's the very simple one. Before I go forward, if you have any questions as I'm going along, please feel free to interrupt me. You can also, yes?
Did you say that reference desk is available on Saturday?
It is available on Saturday, exactly. We're there 8:30 to 5, 8:30 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. So again, please interrupt me with any questions that you may have, and of course I'll take questions at the end of the session as well. On the Law Library's homepage, there are links to some very important resources that I'm going to talk about. What we're going to do today is I'm going to talk about the Law Library's resources and really focus in on the Congress.gov resource, which is our Thomas. If you've used Thomas, have any of you used Thomas for federal legislative information? Congress.gov is the 21st century version of Thomas, and I'll go through that in some detail. And then I'll spend the lion's share of the session on non-Law Library of Congress resources, those trustworthy resources that are out there on the free web. But I'm going to start with just a couple of the products that we do have at the Law Library. Here's the law.gov page, and our information in terms of our hours and our location are there on the right-hand side of the screen. If you scroll down the page just a little bit, you will see the link for Ask a Librarian. And this is a form that you can fill out and submit us a question specifically to the Law Library of Congress staff. What we do is we triage these questions, and we normally have an answer back to you within 5 business days. This is particularly helpful if you have a more complicated research question. That gives us some time to look at our resources, look at resources on the free web that you'll have easy access to, and then to suggest how you may want to start your research. There are a couple other things that are really helpful products that we've developed. The Guide to Law Online there at the top, red box, is something that is really useful, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And then also our legal topics or current legal topics, you'll see it listed as both at different places of the website. And then our global legal monitor. So the Guide to Law Online is a portal of over 9,000 links to both primary and secondary legal material for those 267 jurisdictions. We cover the entire world. And basically what we do is we have links to authoritative material on the web. We keep checking the links. We make sure that we're directing to material that's updated, that is essentially cared for by an organization. And this is an example of the page that you come to. When you click on the Guide to Law Online, you have options up here at the top for nations of the world, U.S. federal pages, and then the U.S. state pages. So if I click on nations of the world, I get an A to Z list of those nations. Let's say I want to click on C for China. I'll come over to the page for China, and I'm going to get links to various aspects of the Chinese government. These materials generally are in English. There are some foreign language materials that we do link to, but this is a product that's really geared towards researchers who want English versions of materials. Now, if I scroll down the page a little bit, I also come to some really good legal guides on China. Some of those guides are born digital items at the Law Library of Congress, and some of them come from different places. We have a couple links here from Yale Law School. We have a blog from Professor Donald Clark at the George Washington University Law School. So there's a number of different secondary resources that are included at the bottom of the page. And the same thing applies at the state level. If I go to the page for Illinois and I click on judicial, I come to links for places where I can find court decisions for the Illinois, both the federal courts and the state courts here in Illinois. So that can be a really nice one-stop shop for material on the free web. And as you can see, you're going to be linked into the Illinois courts website that we're going to actually take a look at a little bit later. That's a really nice site with both Supreme Court of Illinois and Illinois appellate opinions, although you can link into them right here. Also, the Find Law site is very helpful. Not to leave out the other jurisdictions in the area, if I go to the Wisconsin page, for instance, I have that material at the top where I can get into the judicial, legislative, and executive branch material, but I can also scroll on down that page, again, to those legal guides, more of the secondary legal material. I have forms here at the top that are available, so again, a nice quick and dirty way to get to those forms. Also links to the two law schools in Wisconsin, to their libraries and their library catalogs, and then down here research guides on Wisconsin law. So again, these are really nice one-stop shop places. The current legal topics link that is just below the Guide to Law Online link will give you information on the commemorative events that we've had at the Law Library, things that have occurred. When the movie Lincoln came out not terribly long ago, there was a lot of buzz about that, so we decided to put a page up on Abraham Lincoln. Some of them are really focused in on legal issues, but of course, since we are a cultural institution at the Library of Congress, we do have some of that type of material, historical material, in there as well. The Global Legal Monitor, conversely, is a news-oriented product with articles generally written by those foreign trained attorneys in the Global Legal Research Center on hot topics in other countries, things that are going on, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But starting with the current legal topics page, again, the topics can range from campaign finance to materials on particular countries. And so again, it's a bit of a hodgepodge of material, but again, it's worth checking out to see if there's anything of interest to you. We may actually have a page that's connected in some way to the research that you happen to be doing. And this is an entry on Israel, an Israeli Supreme Court decision invalidating the law on Haredi military draft postponement, written by our global legal specialist for Israel. Now again, this is a kind of thing that could have ended up in the Global Legal Monitor, but it's in the current legal topics because it's a little longer. These tend to be slightly longer pieces. What's nice is at the bottom you have footnotes, and so it's kind of like a small law review article often, particularly when the articles are on substantive areas of the law. And the Global Legal Monitor, if you click on that page, you can see our top articles. You can also browse by jurisdiction. So again, if you're doing research on Japanese law, for instance, you can go to our page for Japan and see all the entries that have been indexed as concerning Japanese law. And if I scroll, actually if I go down here and just click on this Morocco entry that we put up in early January, Morocco Rape Law Amendment Considered. Again, it's a fairly short piece. It's more news oriented. but gives you an idea of what's going on in that situation. There are citations to the sources where these were found and links if they're available. The nice thing down here is that the name of the author, the name of the person in the Global Legal Research Center, generally those people are not identified on our website, but you have the name here. You can click on articles, more articles by this author. The other thing you can do is give us a call at the reference desk and we'll put you in touch with that author if you have further questions about this topic. Okay. Any questions about those products that are available from the Law Library's homepage? Okay. The other piece that the Law Library of Congress is involved in terms of free legal research materials on the web would be the federal legislative information sites. And the site that we've been using since the mid-1990s has been called Thomas, for Thomas Jefferson, whose collection began the Library of Congress after the War of 1812, or re-began the Library of Congress, if you would, after the initial books were burned. That has served us well, but we are changing over to a new interface called congress.gov. It is still in its beta form. And the main difference between Thomas and congress.gov is the searching format. In Thomas, what you did is you limited your searches at the beginning and then did a keyword search or browse through materials. And the idea in congress.gov is that you put in a search and then you get a fair amount of material back and then you limit after you've put your search in. And I'll show you how that works. Congress.gov has bill summaries starting in the 93rd Congress, 1973, the bill text starting in the 102nd Congress in 1993, and then starting in the 104th Congress we have the congressional record, congressional committee reports, those types of materials. So again, it can help you to track current legislation. It can also help you if you're doing a bit of a federal legislative history. Okay, so this is the homepage on congress.gov, and one of the big differences between Thomas and congress.gov is every time you're in congress.gov and you're at a URL, no matter where you are on the site, you can copy that URL, you can bookmark it, and it will take you right to that page. That was one of the things we couldn't do in Thomas. We couldn't just take a URL out of the address bar and copy it and put it in an email and have it go right to that page. What we had to do is create what we call a persistent URL. All of the URLs were temporary in Thomas, and they still are. So that's one of the reasons Thomas, towards the end of this year, maybe the very beginning of 2015 at the latest, will be completely replaced by congress.gov. But let me show you a few of the features that we have on congress.gov so far. The search defaults to current legislation, which would be the current 113th Congress, which will take us through the end of 2014. If I do a search with quotations, I'm going to search on a particular phrase, cap and trade. Let's say I'm tracking legislation in that area. Again, I want to put the quotes around that and select current legislation. I can also pull down this menu and go to all legislation, and it's going to cover every Congress that we have in congress.gov, which for the bill summary starts with the 93rd Congress. For the bill text, we start with the 101st Congress, 1989-90. But let's say I want to go ahead and I search on cap and trade, and what happens is I get just a couple bills, just two, because I'm just searching the 113th Congress. So anything that's been introduced since January 2013 is going to be there. So what I can do is over on the left-hand side here, we have these categories, or as librarians call them, facets. You'll hear that word used sometimes if you ever participate in one of our webinars on congress.gov, or you see our pages that describe on the congress.gov site what is new about congress.gov. You'll see that word, and that's what that means. Over here, what I can do is I can click on the Show More link, and then I can get down all the way down to a bunch of these congresses. It just so happens that the oldest Congress where the phrase cap and trade appears is the 105th Congress. So that's the reason I don't have options going back further. But what I can do is open this up. Let's say I'm particularly interested in the 106th Congress, cap and trade legislation that was introduced, debated, maybe passed, maybe didn't, depending upon the situation. Let's say I'm interested in that particular 2-year time frame. I go ahead and just pull my check mark from the 113th down to the 106th, and I've actually got, interestingly enough, 2 bills, just like we have in the 113th. Now you might say at this point, why did the Library of Congress decide to do this? I've used Thomas, I've gotten used to that. The idea here is that we're showing you how you can limit your search after you make it so that you have easier access to go between different congresses. So let's say you did this search in Thomas and you limited it to just the 113th Congress. It's a little bit harder to go back out to the home page and then do the search again on a different Congress, or to group certain Congresses together and then just get rid of that search and do it again. Here in Congress.gov, it's a very easy click from one Congress down to another. You can then put your check mark in different Congresses and you can pull all that information fairly quickly together. It's a concept called federated searching. It's kind of the rage in information among information professionals. And it's considered to be the future, although I do like restricted searching sometimes. I mean, as a librarian, I do see value in that as well. So again, it's been an adjustment for me, but this is where we're going, and it's a fairly intuitive system. So hopefully it'll work for you when you use it. And here are some additional examples of those facets. Remember, we started with the particular Congress, 113th, 112th, what have you. But you can also limit by type of material. So if I just want bills and resolutions, public laws, I click on legislation. If I want references to the congressional record, remember, Congress.gov has the congressional record going back to 1995. I can click on that. There are some options over here. I can also click on the type of legislation over here, the type of introduced legislation. I can also go over here to the right-hand side and limit by what happened to the legislation, if it actually became law, if there were committee activities on it, if it was just introduced and didn't, and maybe it wasn't assigned to a committee, but the committee never did anything with it. It quote-unquote died in committee, then that is a limiter as well. And then the type of committee that would have considered this. And then even over here on the left-hand side, the political party of the sponsor. So how many of these bills were sponsored by Democrats? How many were sponsored by Republicans? That type of thing. So you see, there's a little bit of political distinction there as well. We go back to the law that's been certainly the most famous for the last few years, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act from the 111th Congress. I'm bringing this up because this is an example of when you click on the hypertext linked bill number, you come to what's called the bill summary and status page. And that's really helpful because that gives you some background information on the law. It'll show you that this actually became public law, and if you click on that hypertext link, you'll be brought to the full text PDF of that public law. But if you scroll a little bit down in the bill summary and status page, there are these tabs where you can see different pieces of information on the law. So let's go ahead and click on summary, and there are 4 summaries for this bill based on where the summary was written in the bill's travels. So there was a summary written, and these are written by specialists over the Congressional Research Service. So this is one of CRS's public services. Most of what CRS does is direct service to congressional member and committee offices. But in this case, this is written for inclusion on Congress.gov for the public, and there's a summary of the public law, there is a summary of the enrolled bill from both the House and the Senate, so the version that the House and the Senate passed, and there's usually a summary of the introduced version. There isn't always a summary of what we call the reported version coming out of the committee, because often there is a committee report that does the summarizing of the bill plenty well. So again, but again, there can be reported version summaries, but that gives you an idea of the detail of what's going on here. It kind of goes section by section, and also at the beginning gives you an overview. If I continue along, let's say I go back here, instead of clicking on summary, I click on text. 7 different versions of this bill. I can go between them with this pull-down menu here at the top. And let's say I was interested in the enrolled bill for HR 3590. I can go ahead and click on either the text version of that bill, which I'll get over here, which is in Courier font. It's the quick and dirty HTML version, or I can wait 5 seconds and have the PDF load. Of course, this is I think it's about 600 pages long, so it may take a little bit more than 5 seconds to load. But again, it gives you the full text PDF.
Matt,
Yes, it's-
what is that thing in the upper left corner?
the upper left corner up here is, yeah, that's the pull-down menu for different versions.
Of the upper left corner of the
Oh.
HR, in the little corner of the one of the PDF.
Oh, the little corner, oh, okay, yes, that's a good question. That is an authentication symbol from the US Government Printing Office. And what that is telling you is when you open up a PDF, this is just what the Government Printing Office shows or puts on there to say that they've authenticated this. Now, when you print this off, if you print the PDF off, that symbol will not appear, because the authentication of the document is only for its electronic version. Okay? It's not really that important unless you get into the whole authentication of documents issue. But this is what this means. Now, over here in the text version, you're seeing it from the US Government Printing Office, but it's not quite an authentication of the material. Again, if you're retrieving the material from congress.gov or from the Federal Digital System, which is the Government Printing Office's own site, you can feel confident, in my opinion, that you're getting the best material. I mean, certainly if you're using a commercial resource or a free online resource that has this, you may want to match up the language that you're getting in LexisNexis or Westlaw, or if you're on FindLaw or the Legal Information Institute at Cornell Law School and you're accessing this material, you want to make sure that when they were typing the text into their system, they got it right. But again, yeah, this is what that means. It's a very good question. And you'll see these little different, you'll see this eagle here, and you'll see sometimes a little light blue banner across the top of a PDF, which says the U.S. Government Printing Office certifies this. It was certified by the Superintendent of Documents. So, now, if you go to the right of the Text tab, you see the Actions tab. And of course, with really large pieces of legislation, what we have are many actions. So in this case, we have 209 actions that occurred on HR 3590 from the 111th Congress. What's helpful about this is the default on that tab is to major actions. So I can see the roll call votes on different, at different parts of the process here. And when this passed the House, that was the last, actually, because of the back and forth between the House and the Senate, if you recall, in March 2010, how that happened. The last vote on this was this roll call number 165, and roll call or roll number is usually a vote designation for the House of Representatives. Down here, record vote number usually refers to the Senate. And then over here is a link into the daily edition of the Congressional Record, which is what we have on congress.gov. We don't have the permanent edition because that usually takes about 3 or 4 years to put together. And it's just hard to reload the permanent edition. And it's really not usually any different than the daily edition, except for the pagination is all together for the House and the Senate in the permanent edition. But if I click on the roll number 165, the vote is called a roll call vote. But what happens is you click on that and you're brought right into the House of Representatives site. And you can see the members that voted for and against that particular legislation. Same thing works in the Senate. I click on that record vote number and it takes me to the Senate's website. So you're getting the information directly from the source. Okay. And then if I click on the congressional record link, I can get into pages in the congressional record where I'm seeing the debate. I'll actually see the roll call vote. If there was a voice vote on something, I'll see evidence of that. There are, of course, all these different procedural ways that Congress does business. And so this is a really nice way of getting into the PDF of the congressional record where you can see everything laid out there. So again, the Actions tab can be quite useful. Okay. Now, the Titles tab is helpful because this is something that comes up a lot at the reference table, particularly when people call us and say, you know, I'm looking for the Enhanced Act of 2009. And the Enhanced Act of 2009, as you see here, is really what we call a sub-act. It's a sub-act to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. So what you can do is you can search on Enhanced Act of 2009 right at the congress.gov homepage, and it's going to take you to HR 3590. So if you ever have the popular name of an act and you really don't know where it is, you know, there's a couple of things you can do. You can go to a popular name tool that I'm going to show you in just a moment, different locations for one of those. But you can also go to congress.gov and just type in the popular name. Now again, it has to be for something that, it'd be best if it were something that isn't any older than the 101st Congress. Because in the bill summary, chances are the sub-acts aren't all listed. So this Titles tab works pretty well for the 101st Congress on. But before that, it's probably best to use a popular name tool. But again, this gives you an idea of all the different parts, the sub-acts to the overall act in this case. Okay, and then of course the acts as they were titled in different versions of the bill. Okay. And then the related bills over here on the right-hand side is kind of nice because when you're reading about particular pieces of legislation, you'll hear these numbers thrown out. In the case of HR 3590, we heard different bills being thrown around. Service members home buyer tax credit, you know, there was debate on that bill connected with HR 3590. This will allow you to kind of see what related legislation is out there, what bills, you know, standalone bills that might eventually be tied or brought into the piece of legislation that actually passes. If I can use the word rider, you might see that.
So this represents actual legislation that has been enacted rather than that which is proposed.
It's both. It's both. In fact, in this case, you see over here on the right-hand side, these bills all never made it out of committee because the latest action was, in the case of this Medicaid Birth Center Reimbursement Act, the latest action was, this was referred to the Subcommittee on Health in the House.
And if that were subsequently enacted,
Right.
Would that be changed?
Yes, it would be. In fact, down here, HR 4872, that's actually the reconciliation law that was passed right in March of 2010. If you remember how the health care reform occurred, we really had two laws passed. One became Public Law 111-148, which was started as HR 3590, and then there was Public Law 111-152, which is what's that showing. That actually did become public law.
So that enables you to find it under its enacted form as opposed to its submitted form.
Right, exactly. And in fact, you'll be able to see it under all the different forms, because if you go over here to HR 4872 and clicked on that, you would be brought to the enacted version. But if you wanted to look at the introduced version, you could do that as well. Or if you wanted to look at the version that came out of a committee, you could do that. So the whole thing will be there. So
And
again,
would it work for the same for the Senate?
it works for the Senate. Absolutely. And actually, for something this related, if I go back a couple screens, you may remember when we first went to the bill summary and status page, because HR 4872 was so closely related to HR 3590. In the notes field, you're going to see a reference to 4872. So if it's really closely related, you don't have to go down to the related bills tab. You're going to see it pretty far up on the bill summary and status page. But yeah, those are very good questions, and that kind of allows you, if you're doing really kind of a full analysis on legislative activity on a particular topic, to use the related bills tab to see what else was out there. Even if the bill didn't pass, there may be something interesting in a bill that was proposed. And like I said, sometimes what happens is these bills are proposed, they get to committee, and then what ends up happening is the language in that bill is picked up and it's put in something like HR 3590, and it's one of the reasons that HR 3590 ended up as long as it did, is it just ended up being, it's a snowball effect. Little things keep being added to it. But where are they coming from? They're coming many times from other bills that were proposed and then made it to committee. But it would be easier, procedurally, politically, however you want to call it, to put it into the larger bill.
If you have an enacted bill, and you have the citation to that, how do you get back from the enacted version to the presented version?
Right. Well, what you can do is if you have the public law citation, when you're in congress.gov, and this works in Thomas as well, where no matter what type of citation you click on, you'll be back at the bill summary and status page. You go to that one spot, yeah. And then you can always just go down here to text. If you just click on the text tab, then that's where you're going to get all of those different. This is the example of all the different.
So you can go either
options.
direction.
You can go any direction.
One more question on the
Sure.
related bills. I saw that the source for those was CRS, the source that identified the relationships.
Yeah.
So when you go to the bill, will you also be able to click on the CRS report that identifies those relationships?
Well, you don't get a CRS report specifically, because CRS reports technically are not made public, although we know that there are a lot of sources for them. What CRS does is they do make that connection between bills. Now, how do they do it? They use, I don't want to say a formula, but they pull together, they do searches themselves. And it's not Congress.gov or Thomas, there's actually another system that's used by congressional staff. And they do that. What you will have access to when you go to the different versions of the bills is that there's a CRS summary. Yeah. You will, and if that's what you mean by report, absolutely. Many times when we talk about the really long CRS reports, many times they're on subjects anyway, they're not on pieces of legislation themselves. But yeah, absolutely, you should have access to the CRS summary for that. And again, what that summary does is it usually starts off giving about 3 or 4 paragraphs on the background of the legislation as a whole. And then it will go into specific sections. I don't have a live connection in here, but if I could show you, if you went to the bill summary for the enrolled version, let's say, of HR 3590, it'd be pretty lengthy because it'd have to go by all the different sections of that enrolled bill. And so, again, those summaries are great because you can actually do searches. If you open up the summary and just do a find search from the browser, you can pull up keywords, you can see what section they're in, then go ahead and go into the full text, and that way you're not meandering through 600 pages of stuff. If you go to the summary first, you can usually have an idea, you'll have an idea of where you need to go. So, again, another really good way of using that. Yeah, those are great questions, and really get to the heart of the kinds of products that are on congress.gov. Okay, just a couple more things I want to show you. Actually, really one in particular. If you go back to the HR 3590 bill summary and status page, this is something that comes up a lot, of course, since this, the idea of cost is very much part and parcel to the healthcare reform. Over here, the Congressional Budget Office's cost estimates are also linked here. Now, if you were a congressional user, you could get to, there is actually a CRS report on HR 3590, but you have to be logged into the congressional version of this. But if you click on the CBO cost estimates, you will get sometimes more than one PDF document of the estimates that the CBO has. And you'll see the estimates at different stages of the legislation. So that can be quite helpful, particularly if you're tracking what the tax implications may be of a particular piece of legislation. So that's something that's new to congress.gov. That was not available in Thomas. Congress.gov also allows you to browse through legislation by committee. So if you're tracking a particular committee, I mentioned taxation, the Joint Committee on Taxation, a very important committee. The House Ways and Means Committee, a lot of people like to track what Ways and Means is doing. Go ahead and just click on committees, and you're going to get to their website. If you scroll down the website a little bit, you can get to the bills that they've been considering. Okay? So that can be helpful. And then Thomas, going back just a couple of years, because when I did this session, this is what I talked about instead of congress.gov. Thomas is still around. The easiest way to access it is actually to go to congress.gov and click on a link that I'll show you in just a moment. Now, what is going on between Thomas and congress.gov is information is migrating from Thomas over to congress.gov. So right now, there is some enhanced holdings in Thomas, and enhanced I mean going back further than congress.gov. That will not be the case much longer. As we go through 2014, the content in Thomas will be migrated fully over to congress.gov. But what's happened with congress.gov is there have just been a number of different releases and material brought at different times. The important thing to remember, and what you need to still go to Thomas for, really is this: the treaties and presidential nomination information. We have a list of treaties to which the United States is a signatory nation, starting in 1967, and then details on presidential nominations. If you want to get into the votes in the Senate, for instance, where the Senate has advice and consent over presidential nominations, as they often do. Starting in 1987, we have information on that. You have to go to Thomas for that. The appropriations legislation chart, which is a popular feature in Thomas, is still, of course, on Thomas, but it's also linked from the congress.gov homepage, and I'll show you that right here. If you go back to congress.gov, let's say you want to go to Thomas. You want to use it until it goes away. You've used it for a couple of years now, maybe more than a few years. That is just fine. What you can do is go to the top here at congress.gov, where it says looking for the Thomas site, click on learn more, and you're going to be brought into a page that's going to try to, if you read it, you get the idea. They're trying to get people to use congress.gov. But, of course, if you still want to access Thomas, you can click on it here. The reason that's the easiest thing to do is if you go back here, you see that URL at the top? That is what you need to type in to get to Thomas. Because if you type in thomas.gov or thomas.loc.gov, you will be automatically directed to congress.gov. It's a little sneaky thing we did. That started back in November. So that's, again, we're trying to get people to use congress.gov, but some people really like Thomas, and so it's still around, and by all means, I encourage you to use it. if you like Thomas. So what you can do is go ahead and click on that little link there in the red box down here. The other thing is if you want that appropriation status table, what is that? That's a table with information on appropriations legislation. I'm going to show you that. You can also click right there and it'll take you directly to that table in Thomas. That table will come over to congress.gov probably if the next release is the last one, or it'll be released sometime in 2014. It'll either be an intermediate release sometime over the summer or the final release before Thomas is shut down and everything is up on congress.gov. So it's definitely coming soon. Thomas, this is what it looks like again. It's more of a, late 1990s into the 2000s type of presentation. Why do I say that? It's busy. It's a busy page. There's a lot of links here. And that's part of congress.gov's modus operandi, is to get away from the busyness so that it's easier for you to see what we have. Here, I mean, I've had to use arrows, and it's kind of hard in some ways to see what's going on. But I mentioned the presidential nominations and treaties links up here, that information. That's coming over to congress.gov. It just hasn't quite made it there yet. Down here, there's the link for appropriations bills, but again, that link is on congress.gov. There's also something that I'm hoping is brought over to congress.gov, and I'm going to talk to the congress.gov team when I get back to Washington, because in looking over this presentation last night, I started doing some thinking about how much I really do like being able to scroll through just the public laws themselves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for a particular Congress. And that's something you can't technically do in congress.gov, although I'm going to show you how you get around it. So if you click on the appropriations, or if I click on appropriations bills here, or if I'm in congress.gov and I click on appropriation status Thomas here, it's going to take me to the same place, this table for appropriations legislation. And this table we have going all the way back to 1998. So you can click on that for any year. And what you're going to see is all the appropriations bills that have been introduced. Some of them are omnibus appropriations, and of course that means it's appropriations for many different departments and agencies, particularly of the executive branch of the federal government. Continuing resolutions, which of course are introduced to keep funding static while Congress is fighting over things. You know what it's for. And then, of course, if there are appropriations for particular departments and agencies of the federal government, you'll see those as we go down. You'll see the status, what happened, the votes on these. If there's a committee report, you would see that link there. And then, of course, if the law passed, you'll have a link to the public law there on the right-hand side. So again, if you're trying to track that kind of thing, this table is quite helpful. Okay? Now, back to the public laws link that I showed you, right below appropriations bills and Thomas, down to public laws. You can go all the way back to the 93rd Congress, and you won't get the full text of the public law for the 93rd through the 100th, but you will starting in the 101st all the way up to the 113th, and you can actually scroll through public law 113-1 to 113-76, for instance. And that's a number of public laws that we've had passed so far in the 113th. Last couple Congresses, it's been tough. You know, a lot of gridlock, as we know. And so the number of public laws is down quite a bit. Back in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't uncommon to have 500 to 600 public laws passed in a 2-year congressional session. And I think in the 112th, we had about 125 passed. And so that shows you the difference. Now, of course, when I mean public law, what I'm talking about, of course, is when the bill, an HR for House bill or S for Senate bill, passes both chambers in an identical form and then is signed into law by the president, it gets a public law citation. Now, I mentioned to you how much I like being able to scroll through the public laws here in Thomas. If you can do the same thing in congress.gov, what you do is you just go to congress.gov. You see, remember the default search is current legislation. Just search on nothing. If you search on nothing for current legislation, you're still going to get a page where then you can go over to the facets for legislation type and come down here to see the public laws, and you see the numbers identical. 76 over here in Thomas and 76 over here in Congress.gov, and then you can click on the link and get the list of 76.
What about prior sessions of Congress?
You can, what you would do is go over here and click on, you could either go down here and pull down all legislation, which is the next menu option, or you could do this and actually go, the other facet will allow you to manipulate the particular Congress.
This is my number one reason for coming here today, was to ask you to keep that.
Keep,
I'm a long time Thomas.
you like this, right?
Yeah.
So do I, I'm right there with you.
Okay, thank you.
Let's cheer to that. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, if I can, the other thing, if I can, if you could do me a favor, and that is at the top of congress.gov, you see help contact up here? If you could just, at some point, just go ahead and put a comment on that. That's going to go, I don't know if you've already done that, but that does, they do read those. I do know the congress.gov team reads those. I'm going to push for it myself. I love that too. I was thinking about it last night, and I thought to myself, you know, I can do this, I can get around it, but I don't like that. I like the ability of just seeing everything laid out. And so, yeah, I'm very much hoping they do that. I don't know right now if they're going to or if they're planning on it. I'm not on the Congress.gov team, but I will ask them as soon as I get back to Washington. Because that's, yeah.
To what do you specifically refer under for teachers? Teachers of what? Research? Teachers of high school? Teachers of college? Teachers of law
For teachers,
school?
yeah, that would mainly be, I think a lot of it's for high school teachers, yeah. What that is that links into some material, some documents that explain the federal legislative process, you know, how a bill becomes a law. So, you know, elementary and high
I'll
school
take bets that most teachers don't know about
don't
this.
know about that.
As
yeah.
a former high school
Mhm.
teacher way back when,
Yeah.
I would not have known
Yeah.
anything about this.
Yeah, and that's something that what we do emphasize this, but you know that's another good point that type of thing could be very helpful for teachers. Yeah, we would definitely want to emphasize that. Yeah, and that's something, you know, that's part of the public service aspect of both Thomas and ideally Congress.gov. But yeah, I'm going to definitely take that suggestion and emphasize that because this is very helpful.
I'm also a librarian.
Yes, you're a librarian, and that exactly. So you know that's it. Thank you.
And
And
we're
it's
working with legislative history researchers for our attorneys.
right, exactly, and that's why it's nice to be able to have that one-stop shop. Now, I should say you can do that if you go to the Federal Digital System, or FDSys, or some people call it FedSys. And I'm going to show you that site in just a moment. But you can do this. But you know what? As a staff member of the Library of Congress, I want us to, you know, have this as well, so that you know we can again give you one spot, one place to go, as opposed to 2 or 3 different places on the web to visit. Okay. Okay, so that is basically what we have on the Library of Congress's materials. Any questions about that before I go further?
I've heard and read a private act by Congress.
Right.
Is there a way to access it?
You can access, yeah, you can access, well, there's a couple ways you can do private acts. You can, in Thomas, the references are to the public laws. The easiest way to do private acts is probably to go in, because there aren't that many of them passed now. There were back certainly in the 19th century, because that was the main way that members of the military got their pension benefits, as they went to the members of Congress. And it was before the VA was running. And interestingly enough, you see a lot of that. The U.S. statutes at large, which I'm going to talk about, has all of the private laws listed. You could search just on the statutes at large. Thomas and Congress.gov do have, let's see here. Let's go back for a second here, because this is a question that I think we can answer. Let's see here. Okay. The private laws are there. So remember that facet in Congress.gov laws, public and private. They've got them there. So if you did a search in either Thomas or Congress.gov for something that is, you know, is a private law, it should come up. Yeah, there shouldn't be any distinction. If you want to see the law itself, you have to go to the U.S. statutes at large. The reason I mention the statutes at large is, of course, the private laws never make it into the U.S. code, so you can't go there. But again, if you're trying to look at, and we've been talking about legislation at the beginning stages, with Congress.gov and Thomas, yeah, they should be there. Well, that's a good question. And private laws are interesting. We don't get too many questions on them, but as a librarian, I find them quite interesting because they deal with various subjects, and sometimes those subjects can be quite interesting. Okay. If you want to get in touch with us, you have our phone number on the business cards. You also have the phone number for the reference desk on the last slide. You can go to any Library of Congress webpage, and at the top, left-hand part over by the library's logo, you're going to see Ask a Librarian. Go ahead and just click on that. And what this allows you to do is send us a question through a form to any one of these reading rooms. So if you have a question on movies, you might want to go over to motion picture and television. But you have a question on, you know, how do I find bilateral treaties easily? You can go over here to law and then send us a question. You'll come in actually to the law libraries page, and you can fill out this information and we'll get back to you. Okay. Now what we do with these is we a lot of the time suggest resources for you to look at. We will tell you your local libraries where you can find things, because we will sometimes send you material, but of course a lot of the material we have is subject to licensing agreements, the subscription databases that we have, and we can't send a lot of material to people because that would be violating the licensing agreements. But what we can do is tell you, well, there's a library, particularly here in Chicago, there's so many great law libraries, one that's open to the public where you can access a particular database. So again, send us a question. We try to get back to you pretty quickly. We say 5 business days, but usually we try to do it quicker than that. If it's a really detailed question, we might have to give you a status update and say we're still looking for something. But again, it's another way to get a hold of us. If you've got a quick turnaround deadline, you need some information really quickly, then I would give us a call. Okay, at the phone number. We pick up the phone, as I said, all the way up to 5 o'clock Eastern time. Any questions about that? Okay, so we have spent the first part of the class talking about, or the first part of the presentation, talking about the law library's resources, and now I'm going to talk about material up on the free web that is not created by the Law Library of Congress. And here are the URLs for the items that I'm going to talk about today. Find Law and the Public Library of Law, Open Jurist, and Google Scholar. Those 4 sources are great sources online for court decisions for both federal and state jurisdictions. And then there are a couple jurisdiction-specific sources for court decisions that I want to show you. I want to show you the Judicial Branch of California's page because it utilizes a LexisNexis platform that I think is quite nice. Illinois has a great page. You have to know a little bit about how to use it because if a decision is older than 90 days, it's considered an archived decision, which I found quite interesting. But that is the URL for that. We'll take a look at that. Citators, Shepard's, KeyCite. You need to have a subscription to LexisNexis or Westlaw to use those, or you have to have the stomach to use Shepard's in print in the library. I don't know how many people have that anymore. As a law librarian, I'm losing my patience for it. Although I still think it's such a complex, process in some cases. Just knowing how to do it gives you some power, I suppose. But it's so much easier to do it other ways. Are there any free citators? No, but there are some that are low cost, and I'm going to talk about other ways to get access to those citators when we get there. And then some other pages, the Federal Digital System, the U.S. Code, the version at uscode.house.gov, I think that is great. And then some other sources to find information. I've talked about the Cornell Legal Information Institute, and then some other sources for articles on legal topics, as well as an advocacy page for intellectual property as being an example of a legal advocacy page, and then historical materials at the very end. Okay. FindLaw. FindLaw is a very nice product. It started off fairly modestly and then eventually was purchased by Thomson Reuters. And of course it looks pretty nice now. So it does have the nice interface, and it's fairly intuitive in its presentation. But the thing about FindLaw you have to remember is that findlaw.com, if you just go to that URL, that is not going to get you what you want. You want to go to lp.findlaw.com, that URL, because that's the FindLaw for legal professionals. Okay. So that's going to be much more the kind of material you're looking for. The regular FindLaw is, you know, trying to find an attorney and trying to get some really basic information for non-attorneys on legal matters. So if you go to FindLaw and you click on, there's a couple things you can do here at the home page. You can actually go down here, if you have a citation for a case, you can put in the citation, you can put the party name in here, you can select the court. There are actually examples of contracts, which is quite nice. There aren't that many sites out there that have sample contracts. And then you can also search for articles on the free web, some articles that were born digital to FindLaw itself, meaning that these are authors that were working for FindLaw or submitting material for FindLaw. But the other thing you can do is if you're looking, and we're focusing on court decisions right now because as I've done this session over the years, that's something that keeps coming back is, you know, Matt, all this other stuff is great, but I really want to know where I can get, you know, decisions. Well, let's go up here to Cases and Codes and click on that. And this over on the left-hand side here is the top of the Cases and Codes page. So down here I can, again, pick a court and pick a topic and get a list of decisions that are indexed to that particular topic. So let's say I'm interested in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit and family law decisions, indexed family law decisions in that particular court. I can click on this and get decisions, usually going back a good 10 or 15 years. Okay, there isn't a strict coverage map for FindLaw. That's generally what you find. Now let's say you're interested specifically in U.S. Supreme Court decisions. There's a U.S. Supreme Court Center in FindLaw that I'm going to show you, but you can also go up here to the top of the Cases and Codes page and click on U.S. Supreme Court and get to that information. There are also for, you know, highly populated jurisdictions some quick links to those jurisdictional pages. But I want to show you, if I click on this first decision right here in the DC Circuit, I'm going to get some background on the decision, but then also I'm getting, if available, the full text PDF. Sometimes these PDFs were originally on the court's website and they're no longer there in FindLaw. Grab them and put them on their site. Sometimes you're linking directly into the court's site because the decisions are still there. But again, why you would go to FindLaw is that you can access all these different courts in one spot. Yes, Liz?
Does it give you the citation?
Yeah, the citation, if it's available, you'll have that. In this case, yeah, there is no citation here to the Federal Reporter that I can see. It's possible that it's an unreported decision, but if there is a citation, you should get it. What you're getting here, of course, is a docket number. So what you may want to do is, this would be an example, if for some reason FindLaw doesn't have the Federal Reporter citation, because of course this is a federal appellate decision, what you may want to do is use a tool like Google Scholar. I'm going to show you how to use that in just a moment. Go ahead and type in either the docket number or the party names. You can limit in Google Scholar to the court, and Google Scholar should give you the citation.
There's no way to know if a particular Court of Appeals case was appealed to the Supreme Court. It isn't later on annotated.
Yeah, that's why you want a citator or something showing you the subsequent history. Yeah, and that's a very good point. In this case, what you're getting is a decision. You're not seeing if the decision had been appealed, and so that's why. What you may want to do is do a search. In this case, the appeal would go to the U.S. Supreme Court. You could also do a search on Supreme Court decisions on the party names to see at least if a petition for cert was denied. Then you know that there was no subsequent appeal. You can also put in, Shaban as a party name and see if the Supreme Court did hear an appeal, did make a decision on an appeal in this situation. That's kind of a way around this without using a citator to see what happened. But that's a good question. And you won't see the subsequent activity by just going to the decisions in fine law. Yeah. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court opinions link, remember a couple screenshots back when I went ahead and if I click on that, I'm going to come to this page. And what I can do is fine law has Supreme Court decisions going back to 1893, all of them. So that's pretty nice. If I have a citation, or I have a party name, or if I want to just do a full text search on U.S. Supreme Court decisions, I can go up here and do that in this box. If I want to see all of fine law's holdings regarding the Supreme Court, the Fine Law Supreme Court Center is where I go, and they actually have briefs for many cases, both merit and amicus briefs, for 1999 to 2007. Now, of course, you may ask, well, that's great, but what about 2007 to the present? 1999 going on back. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But let's say you have a citation to a Supreme Court decision, 388 U.S. 1, which is Loving versus Virginia. Loving v. Virginia, I get to that decision. I'm not getting a PDF from the U.S. reports or the Supreme Court Reporter or the Lawyer's Edition. But I am getting this in HTML. You may, to confirm the language, want to check either one of the print reporters or if you have access, let's say, to Hein Online, which has the U.S. reports in PDF, you may want to confirm the language. But again, this is usually pretty good. Fine Law is definitely a very well-respected site. What I like about what Fine Law does is it has the U.S. reports pagination going all the way through. So you get that pin site, that particular page where language that you're interested in is located. Okay, so and that's going to come up in the blue text throughout the opinion. Now, if I want those records and briefs in Fine Law, again, I can go to the U.S. Supreme Court Center and I can see all these little different options here. Let's go ahead and click on the briefs link. And I can see briefs, again, for all these different years. I'm getting the briefs by docket number. This is something I wish Fine Law would do, again, is put in the U.S. report citation. That would be helpful. And if I would have one suggestion for them, I would say, okay, it's great to have the docket number, but I would really like to have the citation, because most of the time, that's what we have, is we have the citation of the U.S. reports. Or, maybe one of the unofficial reports, but at least some citation for the decision would be nice. Now, let me talk about briefs for other years after I show you this. This is just an example of a brief that's on Fine Law. They're in PDF. The briefs are in PDF. And what Fine Law has done is they've gone, over the years, they've just collected these briefs and they've saved them. And it's interesting because the copyright status of briefs to federal courts is, I believe, currently still, it's being fleshed out right now. There's really no bright line rule on that. But anyhow, fine law does have them for a number of years there. Okay, so fine law has briefs up through 2007. The ABA itself, as you may know, has briefs for the last couple years on its preview of United States Supreme Court cases site. Here is the URL at the top. This is the page that if you go to supremecourt.gov, the Supreme Court's own site, and you click on the link for briefs, this is where you'll come for briefs on the free web. The Supreme Court will also has a page where it explains you can get briefs in Westlaw, Lexis, the U.S. Supreme Court briefs database by Gale that covers up through 1978. That type of detail is there. But the Supreme Court itself links into this page where you can get the briefs, in this case going back to the 2012-2013 term. So we have 1999 through 2007, and then we have 2012 through 2014. Where's the gap between 2007 and 2012? How's that being filled? Well, this is what I'm going to have to do when I go back to Washington, and I apologize for not having it this morning. I need to add in a couple slides for the SCOTUS blog, or SCOTUS blog, if any of you use that. SCOTUS blog has briefs going back to 2010. Now, do they have the brief for every decision or every case filed? I should say. I can't say that they do. It seems like they do. What's great about SCOTUS blog is they grab all the amicus briefs too. I mean, it's really a pretty comprehensive tool. But as far as I can tell, SCOTUS blog does only go back to 2010. I can't find briefs for 2008 and 2009 on SCOTUS blog. So for those 2 years, the best suggestion I have, well, first off, I would Google. I really would. I would go ahead and just do a Google or a Lycos search on briefs for a particular decision in the Supreme Court, because sometimes the parties will put them up on a firm's page. Sometimes attorneys, if they have their own personal web pages, they'll put them up there. So you can sometimes find them. I think there are 12 U.S. Supreme Court depository libraries in the country. The Law Library of Congress is one of them. The only rub there is you really have to be in the library to get those briefs. You can request the briefs through the library's duplication services, but it's costly. So if you're looking for a brief for those 2 years, or if you're looking for a pre-1999 brief, go ahead and send us an Ask a Librarian request, or give us a call at the reference desk, and we'll get you to the place closest to you where you can get that. It may be that what you're looking for would be, particularly if it's between 1978 and 1999, briefs often are held by the larger academic law libraries in microfilm or microfiche. I know, yeah, I heard that. Microfiche is a little easier to use. Trust me, that's what librarians get paid to do, to help you use that stuff and not get terribly frustrated. So we will get you where you need to go. But again, the briefs, there's just nothing standard yet. We're hoping one day that the Law Library of Congress can maybe start digitizing it. This is something that we talked about. Again, there are copyright concerns there, and just having the staff and the resources to do it. But that's something that always comes up when people come into the reading room. They say, why don't you digitize your Supreme Court briefs? So. At the Fine Law homepage, remember, we have the Cases and Codes tab on the left-hand side. This is also helpful for state material. And so, let's say I'm practicing in Florida. I want to know what's out there that's really good for Florida decisions. Again, this is one tool, kind of like the Florida page on the Law Library of Congress's Guide to Law Online, where you can go and click on a particular jurisdiction. In the case of Florida, I click on that, and I'm brought to this page where I can see federal court opinions for both the in this case, it would be for the 11th Circuit. If there are some district court opinions in Florida available, those will be there as well. State court opinions, I'm seeing those for the Supreme Court and for the District Court of Appeals. But I also have a link here for the Supreme Court of Florida opinions and briefs that Florida State University's College of Law has put up on their page, and I can click into that, and voila, I've got state court records and briefs. Now, generally for the state courts, you're talking about the Supreme Court, those records and briefs being available. However, when I was in graduate school in North Carolina, I was in a library where we actually had a print collection of records and briefs for the state Supreme Court and the appellate courts in the state. So it just kind of depends on how these have been collected over the years. Okay? But what's great about fine laws, if you're looking for the briefs of the state, that would be one of the first places I would go. Again, you can check our guide to law online, but when it gets into the more nuanced court documents, fine law is helpful. Any questions about fine law? I spent a lot of time on fine law. It's the one product that I spend probably the most time on, besides congress.gov, because there is a lot there, and it links into a lot of things, but there are also a lot of things on the website itself. Okay, as we're moving along, the Public Library of Law is a product of Fastcase. Now I'm going to talk about Fastcase when I get to free. They can be free if you're a member of a state bar association, although you're paying dues, so nothing's really free, but we'll get there. But Fastcase operates the Public Library of Law where you can get decisions for free. Here's a search on ammonium nitrate in all jurisdictions. When I did this search, I was thinking about the disaster at the factory in West Texas just over a year ago, where there was a large explosion and it was caused by ammonium nitrate. So I'm interested in the regulation of ammonium nitrate, particularly at the state level. In this case, I'm actually defaulting to federal decisions, but let's say I want to go through and find state decisions, I can do that. The Public Library of Law is nice in that it will give you decisions from federal and state jurisdictions. It will bold the search terms right here in the short descriptions of the decisions. The tough thing about this is that you have to register. I mean, it's not tough, it takes just a couple of minutes, but you have to register for free. It doesn't cost anything, but you still have to register and get a password to use this. Now, the way that this is working is this is kind of a gateway to Fastcase. Fastcase is a subscription product. However, like CaseMaker, and I'm going to talk about those two products in just a moment, many state bar associations offer free access to both Fastcase and CaseMaker. And I've got a list of the jurisdictions here in the Midwest, generally, that do offer access to those. So I'll talk about that in just a moment. But and this is kind of a gateway to Fastcase. What they want you to do is they say up here, there's 196 more decisions in Fastcase. If you were just a Fastcase subscriber, you could get to those. So the Public Library of Law is one product. Another product is Open Jurist. And I've become more of a fan of Open Jurist recently because it's a fairly easy product to use. You know, the text is pretty large. I don't know, I think that's kind of nice, particularly if I have a hard time seeing. So this is the URL there at the top, and you can actually go into pages for particular reporters, which is interesting because you don't normally see decisions organized that way. We normally see decisions organized by particular court, not by the print reporter. But anyhow, Open Jurist has decided to do it a little differently. I always think of Open Jurist as maybe being having some librarians behind it, because it's people like us who think of the books when we think of these things. But you can click on the particular reporter. You can also go up here and do a search at the top of the page on opinions. Just do a keyword search and get material back. You can, if you got a citation, you can go to your decision. And in the case, this is the case here, this is a 1995 Ninth Circuit decision. I get my decision in HTML, much like it would have come up in FindLaw. What's nice over here is I can develop, get a short URL in which to link, put into an email. Something that's pretty easy to use. I can also email the page directly from the free database. So again, there's some options here. I found this to be a nice site to use as well. But my favorite, oh, Google's the favorite of everyone, isn't it now? Yeah, Google's done a nice job with decisions. Librarians, I think, like Google a lot because, I don't know, there's just a lot of different options, and it's a nice combination between that concept of federated searching I mentioned before, where you just put in a term and then you limit later, and the ability to limit searches on the front end of your usage of the product. So if you go to scholar.google.com, there's a couple options. The default option in Google Scholar is to search articles. You can also search patents, which I'll talk about in a moment. But if you click on, question? Yeah.
Under Google or some of the other search engines, can you do a Lexis type search, that, for example, a phrase in the same document as another phrase?
I don't believe you can do that kind of, like a word and then a slash and then within 5 words of another word. That really is, that kind of searching capability is usually what you see only in Lexis and Westlaw. But you can use quotations to get specific phrases, and what you can do in Google Scholar is the longer your specific phrase is, the narrower your search, certainly. You can do a straight Boolean search. You can do and or. Well, or is the default, so if you don't put anything in between terms, it's always an or search in most products.
Are the articles to which you are sent in strictly legal publications or in merely informative publications?
It's everything. The articles are, I mean, if you search on a legal topic, you're mainly in legal articles. But yeah, the same searching capability works for the articles. What Google Scholar gives you is a combination of material. This is what's tough. It's a combination of material that's on the free web and held in subscription databases such as Hein Online. Have most of you familiar with Hein Online? You use it? Okay. HEIN online.org. It's a subscription database, but many librarians consider it their favorite subscription product. Many law librarians, I should say.
Give me the site again?
It's www.heinonline. It's HEIN online.org. And then the reason I don't talk about Hein Online in this session is it's not a free resource. But it is available in many cases in academic libraries, general academic libraries, not just academic law libraries. So you can go to the main library of many large research institutions and use Hein Online because the subscription is purchased by the university library in many cases. Not all, but in many cases it is. Why Hein Online is great is they've digitized the entire U.S. code and all the superseded versions, the U.S. reports, all the congressional record. And of course what it was initially known for was the digitizing of law review and journal issues. And so if you want to look at the Northwestern University Law Review going back to the beginning, you can see all the PDFs for that journal. So there are a lot of different options there. But Hein Online has put a lot of its records, it can be searched in Google Scholar. So again, you have to be careful. If you're accessing the web from an institution that has a Hein Online subscription, you can use Google Scholar to get to articles themselves if there's the technical setup for that using what we call link resolver. But yeah, I mean, Google Scholar kind of goes all over the web. But what's great about the legal documents button here is that legal documents means court decisions. I don't know why they don't just call it court decisions, but basically it means court decisions. Although you may be able to get some of the articles, now that I think about it, some law review articles with the legal documents. You can certainly do it with the articles option as well. What you can do though is you can also select courts, and let's say I want to limit to the 7th Circuit, and not just the 7th Circuit, but 7th Circuit opinions that originated out of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Indiana. Then I can click on that and I'm only getting decisions in the 7th Circuit that originated out of that particular, I mean, not just out of a Indiana District Court, but out of that particular regional district, which can be quite helpful. Let's say I do a search on copyright. As broad as you can have. I mean, you know, I should have put at least, you know, fair use or something else in there, but we just do copyright, and I'm just searching the 7th Circuit, no restriction on the originating district court, and I get these list of decisions right here. Like the public library of law, my search term is bolded in the description, and then I can click on the decision, and once again, I get my decision there at the top. And what's nice, remember we talked about citations, Google Scholar has, unlike FindLaw, I shouldn't say, maybe FindLaw hasn't for some, Google Scholar will give you the citation to the Federal Reporter. And in the case of a district court decision, the Federal Supplement, the case of the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. reports. And then of course, in the case of a state decision, you'll get at least the regional reporter citation.
So if you already know the citation, but you're trying to get a hold of the actual document, this might be the best way to...
I think it is. I think it is, because what you can do is you can go in, what's really great is going back to Google Scholar's homepage, go ahead and just click on legal documents. What I would do is put the citation in quotes. And the first document that comes up should be that decision. Yeah, because what's going to happen is that you're going to get to the decision, and what's going to be bold, well, it's not bolded. In the case of the decision, it is bolded, and it's also got this beige shade behind it. What they'll just bold and beige shade is the citation itself, indicating that your search was on the citation, not on something inside of the opinion. Okay. Now, there is something else I should mention here. This is a little rumor that was out there among law librarians, and that is that you could use Google Scholar as a free citator. And the way you could do it is you could do exactly that. You could put in a search for a citation. And what's happening is the first decision that comes up should be that decision, should be the decision with that citation. But that the subsequent decisions will be decisions that cite to that decision somewhere in the text of the case, of the decision itself. And there was at least one study out there that suggested that Google had perfected the algorithm enough to where if there had been negative treatment on the decision that you're searching on, that would come up pretty high in the list. I haven't tested this, I have no idea, but apparently this has worked for some people. I suppose it would work if, let's say, you were searching on a decision that had maybe been criticized or distinguished by one or two other decisions. Then I could see this working. You know, you could only, if you imagine being in Lexis and shepherdizing a decision and having a fairly short list for the subsequent activity, that may work. I wouldn't say, you know, rely on this for that, but I think that's something that's quite interesting. You could also, you know, put the word criticized or do something like that and see if that would work. But I even have a better option for you coming up in just a moment. I'll show you. But yeah, Google Scholar has a lot of decisions from all kinds of different courts, federal and state. Again, what they've done, Google, they go to the primary resources and they type them in to their interface. A number of the states have got their own pages for decisions. California is one that I like quite a lot. Because it uses a LexisNexis platform, but it's available for free. There are a number of other states that do this. If you go to this URL for the California courts and you search on the official opinions here, you have them going all the way back to the beginning of California's statehood in 1850, which is quite nice. Now, if you click on that, though, you have to make one more choice, and that is between officially published opinions and unpublished opinions. In California, published opinions are those that generally the court rules at the state level prohibit citation in the briefs and reference on oral arguments. So, you know, you want to be careful. I mean, if you find something in the unpublished opinions category, you're practicing in California, you may not want to use it. You might want to find something that's a decision that's similar to it. Again, though, there are a number of reasons why a case may be unpublished. It might just not establish new law. You know, there's a lot of things that go into why judges decide that a case should not be published. But ideally, what you're looking for is in the published opinions. Let's say you go ahead and search on California published opinions, and this is just a search on San Francisco Giants. I could have done Chicago Cubs, or, you know, for any White Sox fans here, I could have done that too. But of course, in California, I don't think there'd be too many references to those two teams. But I put in San Francisco Giants, and I didn't put any date restriction, and I got back 10 decisions, which is kind of interesting. I thought there'd be more, but then the more I think about it, you know, Major League Baseball franchises often matters end up in federal court, not state court. So that's probably has something to do with it. But since 1850, we have, well, I guess the other thing is the San Francisco Giants started play in 1958 in San Francisco. Before that, they played at the Polo Grounds in Harlem. So, you know, they were the New York Giants. So that's part of the reason. But you have 10 decisions here, and if you click on one of them, you get the decision. What you would see is a LexisNexis interface, and so that's quite nice. Now, one of the things that's a bit of an ouch is, it always happens, is you'll get the little shepherd's indicator. There's your little yellow triangle, which means caution, right? And of course, when you go to this, you say, well, great, they've got shepherds online for free. And then you click on it, and down here, shepherds is not available under your current subscription. So what does this do? It tells you that you should proceed with caution, but it doesn't tell you why. So again, that's maybe a reason why you would want to look at a citator in print or online. And again, I'll talk about the citator in just a moment. Here in Illinois, a similar product. Here's the URL for the state of Illinois. I can get the opinions for the Supreme Court and the appellate courts. But again, if the opinions are older than 90 days, I have to go to the opinions archive. They really archive things quickly in Illinois. But if I go to the opinions archive, I can get, and even if it's a current opinion, I can get the PDF of the opinion right here. I can get a case summary. The PDF is, let's see here, I think the PDF, actually, if you click on this right here, you'll come to the PDF of the decision. In this, that column right there. If I go to the archived opinions, I go back to 1996 and pick the particular court and then do a search. They're utilizing a Google search there for that, and then I can get to the decision. If the decision is older than a couple years, chances are I am going to get it in HTML. That probably is because the court itself, I mean, as you can see, this is a 2000 decision. Chances are that the Circuit Court of Kendall County wasn't putting PDFs of its decisions on its website in 2000. It most likely is now. I don't know for sure, but in 2000 they probably weren't. And so what happened is the the team behind the site had to go to a print reporter or maybe a standalone PDF that was available on a subscription database and transcribe the decision. So that's why you're not getting an original, an image of that PDF. But again, it's the state's website. There's authority in that it is an Illinois-operated tool. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay. We're moving right along here. Citators. Okay, so citators, of course, we use them to show us the, generally in the case of research with decisions, we're interested in whether the decision is still good law, certainly. We want to know if it's been distinguished in any way or criticized in any way. And Shepard's, which is a LexisNexis product, does a very nice job of that, as well as Keysight, which is the Westlaw product. Shepard's, you really do need, to my knowledge, a password access to LexisNexis to get it. Some law libraries, actually very few now, it seems, but the Law Library of Congress is one of them, still have the print volumes of Shepard's. Keysight, if you have password access to Westlaw, you can certainly get to it. Many libraries for members of the public, but also some academic law libraries for their alums, have a Westlaw patron access terminal, which often has Keysight, where you can put in the citation to a court decision, to a statute, to a regulation. So you can put a citation to the CFR in there, and you can see the subsequent treatment. But there are some citators in products such as Lois Law Connect. Their citator is called Global Cite. CaseMakers is called CiteCheck. And FastCase is called the Bad Law Bot. There's also another product in FastCase called Authority Check. But Authority Check does not show you, does not distinguish clearly whether subsequent treatment is criticizing or distinguishing. It just kind of gives you a list of cases that cite the case you're searching on. So again, those are low-cost options if you go to those sites. But let me tell you that even though there's no free citator out there, there was one called Precedent that was around for a few years. There are some options that you can take. One is, this is the global site in Wolters Kluwer. There's a free trial that you could set up that you could, for usually a couple days, if you need to cite a lot of things all at once, you can use this. This is a pretty good product. But then again, after that trial, you'll have to go ahead and subscribe. But what's really interesting is the two products in CaseMaker and FastCase. CaseMaker's CiteCheck, even if you don't have subscription access to CaseMaker, you can go to this URL and for $10 you can put a brief on the site in Word, in text, or in PDF, and it will do a complete analysis of the decisions that you've even cited. So again, this is even going beyond trying to quote-unquote shepherdize or check the validity of a particular decision. This is a product where you can put in a brief and it will do that for all of the cited decisions in your brief. Okay? So that's pretty nice for $10 a document. The other thing is if you're a member of the state bar associations in Indiana, Michigan, or Ohio.
Chicago Bar.
Chicago Bar's got it. Okay, good. Did everyone hear that? Chicago Bar has.
You got to be a member of the Chicago Bar Association.
Chicago Bar. There are some city bars that have it too. That's a good point.
Colorado Bar has it. There's a lot more. Colorado Bar.
Oh yeah, those are just three local. Yeah, the problem is CaseMaker doesn't have I couldn't find a list of every bar on their site that subscribe. FastCase has that list. But yeah, there are a lot of other bars. That's just this local area. But yeah, I mean there's bar associations, both city and state. There might even be some regional bar associations within particular states that do subscribe to CaseMaker. So you can get to this, if you have a subscription to Casemaker, this is going to be a free service there. You don't have to pay the $10. Fastcase has the bad law bot, where if you, again, you have to subscribe to Fastcase, but if you're a member of the state bars in Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri, Minnesota, New York, DC, then you will have access to Fastcase. So again, the moral of the story is go ahead and check your state and local bar membership. See if you have access to particularly Casemaker or Fastcase, and chances are you will have access to a citator. Okay, so that's the good news. Sometimes these citators, like with the rest of the products in Fastcase and Casemaker, you can get to on a mobile device. So if you're outside the courtroom and you need to look at something really quickly, boom, you can pull it out. You usually can get to your online citator right away. Sometimes the question comes up: are these as good as Shepard's and Keysight? They're good products. Again, you may want to do a fair amount of the legwork in terms of finding out whether decisions are good law before you walk over to the courthouse. But you know, if something comes up and opposing counsel cites something and you're like, well, I want to check this, I want to make sure that, because I may have a good argument that this case is really, doesn't apply, or, it's been criticized heavily. These are good products that you can catch on the fly. Okay? Okay, so at this point, I'm going to to finish up the session, step away from court decisions and show you where you can find statutes and regulations and a few other things. I mentioned the Federal Digital System, or FDSys, which is operated by the Government Printing Office. There's a lot of interesting things here, a lot of federal government documentation. You can do an advanced search here at the top of the screen. You can also go down here and browse the various collections. If you do an advanced search, you can search all these different types of collections, including the United States Code. And if you go to the U.S. Code, you can pull up the U.S. Code officially in both HTML here at the top and in the PDF. And again, you're going to get that Superintendent of Documents seal. It's the same. You actually get both of them in this case. You get the seal on the PDF, and then you get the eagle right here, showing that that electronic version has been authenticated. Okay. If you go down here to Browse Collections, you can browse all kinds of different things, committee reports, the parts of the congressional record. What I find to be the most helpful thing to browse is the U.S. statutes at large, where you have a chronological collection of all the public and private laws passed by the federal government. If you go up to collection here, down here to U.S. statutes at large, you can actually pull up the statutes at large for a particular Congress going back to 1951. This is something that FDSys just started providing access for a couple of years ago. Before that, if you wanted the statutes at large in PDF, you really had to use Hein Online. And if you scroll down here, you can actually pull up the PDF for a particular public law, in this case a public law from 1970, and you're getting it in the image of the print volume. So that can be quite helpful. But my favorite version of the U.S. Code, going back to that, is on the House Office of the Law Revision Council's website. Because this is continuously updated in the same way that the code is updated in LexisNexis or Westlaw. And then the other thing, beyond having just a really nice version of the code, there's a popular name tool. If I have the name of a popular act, I can then get the public law citation and the general citation to the U.S. Code for where that law is. So if I want to do a search, let's say I'm interested in something called a nuclear posture review, I can put that in quotations, search the U.S. Code, and get to the statute on that, and the phrase is highlighted in yellow. If there are updates on this particular section of the code, based on a public law that was passed fairly recently, I can get those details. And those details come up at this little box right here that comes up when I click on the View Details link right here. The other thing that's really nice here is that this particular statute was just added to the code itself at the very end of the 112th Congress, one day before the 113th began. The last possible day, January 2nd, 2013. The 113th began on January 3rd. So again, if I'm using the PDF of the code in that thesis, let's say that instead of this being January 2nd, 2013, it was 2014, I might miss out on something. So I definitely want to use the most updated version. And this is an official version of the code. Is it authenticated? No, but it's coming from the House of Representatives. And so by that, when I use to say official, I'm saying that the House of Representatives is issuing it. And so you can feel confident using it. Okay? This update, though, to the particular code section is for Public Law 113-66, and sometimes when you click on these public laws, you won't get anything because the public law hasn't been made yet. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for the government printing office to issue the official public law. And so sometimes all you have to go with is the enrolled version of the bill, which is the version that the president will sign into law, or did sign into law, I should say. You can confirm this by going to congress.gov and just making sure that the public law link isn't hypertext linked. And so the public law line isn't hypertext linked. But then if you go to congress.gov, you can get the enrolled version of the bill. In this case, we had a bill that was passed at the end of 2013, and because it's an authorization act, they're still reviewing it to make sure that it has everything it needs in it before they officially release the public law. But because we don't have the line item veto or all these little procedures that used to allow the president to make changes unilaterally to a public law after it's had passed both chambers of Congress, you can feel confident in using the enrolled version of the bill as you would see it in congress.gov to see what the actual language of the law is. Okay. Popular name table in the uscode.house.gov site. Over here, if I click it on the left-hand side, I can go by the beginning title over here on the right-hand side. Let's say I'm interested in laws that have the word Illinois in them, or start with the word Illinois. I can go over here and see all of these different references. Public laws, I can click on these public laws and be brought directly to the PDF of the public law. I also get the citation to the US Code, which then I can go back to the home page and put in the code section.
A few years ago, there was a controversy about signing statements that the president signed to a law.
Right.
Which would appear on the public law.
The signing statements don't appear generally in the public law, to my knowledge. You may find them in the daily compilation of presidential documents, which is available from the FDSIS website that we saw before. If they're in the daily compilation, they very well may make it into Title III of the CFR, which is kind of a catch-all for presidential material. But yeah, generally the signing statements don't end up in the public law or anything, because the president's actions, when the president signs a public law, that version then goes to the National Archives, and that's the only version with the president's signature on it. When the government printing office produces the public law for mass display, it doesn't have the president's signature, which is kind of interesting. I've always kind of wondered why not. You know, there must be a reason for it, and because I don't work for the GPO, I don't know. But yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, generally those signing statements are. Regulations.gov is another good site to go to if you're looking for particularly material that has appeared in the Federal Register fairly recently. I can search by department over here in the search box, and I can see which regulations are in an open comment period and which are closed. And in some cases, depending upon what the department or agency wants, I can go over here and submit comments myself. And the comments are due. This is kind of interesting. Sometimes I have never noticed this. So I might want to change this slide, but apparently we're going to be commenting all the way up to 2099 for this regulation. And I'm pretty sure that was a mistake. So I'm actually going to change that because that was a mistake in their site. This was a great example, and the problem is as you know, when you look at these very carefully, you realize sometimes there's a problem with the site. So, but again, that's another good tool. The USA.gov site, a portal for all federal government information. What's great about this is that you can usually search the website for the particular agency right from the USA.gov site. In this case, it's the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And then Cornell University's Legal Information Institute site, which has a URL that you would think would be the URL for the law school itself, law.cornell.edu, but instead it takes you here. But what's great about this site is this has unofficial versions of the U.S. Code, the CFR. It has pages on legal topics for both federal and state jurisdiction. And there's actually a little topical index of state statutes. This is not like one of the 50 state surveys, for instance, that you see in LexisNexis, but again, it'll give you a list of the code sections for various jurisdictions for statutes on alcoholic beverages, for instance. So again, that could be another really quick and dirty place to get information. LexisWeb is very similar to Google Scholar. You can do searches for articles, and sometimes you will get material from free websites like Ober Kaler's website here. We get an article on the healthcare legislation from 4 years ago. Some of the material that the LexisWeb search will give you is Lexis material. And so if you click on the link, it'll ask you to log into Lexis. So you have to be careful there. It's similar to Google Scholar in that Google Scholar has a lot of Hein Online links, or in JSTOR. That's another database where you see Google Scholar, a lot of URLs in Google Scholar to JSTOR. You have to either be at an institution where you have that has a subscription to one of those databases and you go directly into the article, or you have to be connecting to a subscribing institution through a proxy server or something along those lines. Okay. HG.org, again, another site that has a lot of articles in it on various aspects of legal practice and legal research. What's nice about HG is that a lot of these are written directly for HG. So you get the contact information for the person that's writing it, but also you could contact or do searches through HG for the articles that they have had contracted for them. Google Scholar, again, I mentioned you can search for patents, and if I want to do a patent search on the Weber grill, I can get my claims and specifications in PDF. I will drawings of the Weber grill. Right there. We all love it and know it, and I don't know how many people use it anymore, but it was certainly popular when I was younger. And then I can get information on the assignee for the patent, and the prior art as well is referenced, and then the direct link to the patent in Google Patents. There are a number of advocacy organizations out there that link to legislation in particular. The Intellectual Property Owners Association is a great site where you can click on advocacy at the top, patent legislation over here, and then you're going to see bills that are pending in Congress on this particular, on issues of intellectual property. Probably with a focus on patent, but also references to copyright, trademark, trade secret matters as well. One thing about this site that I noticed that I need to contact them about is that they're still linking in the Thomas. So hopefully, I might actually send them a message because they're based in Washington, D.C., to tell them, you know, you might want to think about at least offering a subsequent link or let's say a parallel link to Congress.gov for these pieces of legislation. And again, it's another way, you can do this for many different subjects, to use an advocacy website, an advocacy organization's website, to see if they're tracking what's going on in Congress. And most of the time, they are. You may also be tracking court decisions, decisions from the U.S. Court of Appeals to the Federal Circuit. You can often track through the Intellectual Property Owners Association. At the same site, the same advocacy link. A couple last things. If you're ever doing research on particularly executive orders and presidential proclamations, the American Presidency Project at UC Santa Barbara is a great site. If you go to this URL and click on the documents link at the top, you can get executive orders all the way from John Quincy Adams to President Obama, and the proclamations for every president, and you get the text in HTML. Starting with the publication of the Federal Register in 1936, the executive orders and presidential proclamations were officially published, but before that they weren't. They're actually only available in a microfiche set, and they're normally handwritten. They're impossible to read. There were some presidents in the 19th century who could not write. I can tell you, I've looked at them myself. So again, this is a nice site, particularly if you're doing historical research, it's almost essential. But even if you're just trying to find out the text of a presidential proclamation or executive order, it's a good place to go. The Avalon Project at Yale Law School has a lot of historical documents as well. It also is a great site. If you go over here to 20th century documents, you can pull up some really popular pieces of legislation, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then just have a really quick site to see the entire act as it would have appeared in the statutes at large. Okay. The one thing is because it's organized just like the statutes at large, you sometimes have to scroll down and do a search on the page itself to get to what you're looking for. Then finally, the last thing I want to just emphasize is when you're doing these searches, it's always good to use more than just Google. Use a meta search engine, something that's going to really search the web in a very deep way. A meta search engine aggregates results from all kinds of search products. And you can also do an advanced search on Google, for instance, and limit your searches to .gov, .edu sites, those types of things. Okay, there is the contact information for the reference desk, our hours at the reference desk, the direct URL to the Law Library's Ask a Librarian page, and then my direct contact information. And I want to thank you so very much for coming this morning, and I will answer any of the questions that you may have now.